Good evening, and thank you for coming out to today's town hall meeting with respect to Cityhood. This is a series of meetings that I and other commissioners have been having with staff to best educate residents about matters pertaining to cityhood. This has been in response to the myriad of questions that we've been receiving from the public. And so we wanted to take a position that would enable us to be as neutral as we can be as representatives of Cobb County government, not in being a proponent of the cityhood measure, but also not being in opposition, but sharing the benefit of our experience in working with the county and reflecting on various documents pertaining to cityhood to respond again to the myriad of questions that we've received. Hopefully, many of you are familiar by now with our website, www.cobbcounty.org/cityhood. A lot of the information that we'll be referring to or incorporating in our remarks today are included on that website. We also have information about feasibility studies that includes maps, as we've been receiving questions about whether or not someone resides in a city or not. Other questions that we've included have been those frequently asked, and we just have just a handful of them on this one pager that I hope many of you have picked up when you entered into the room today. I will just kick off by going through a few of those, and then we're going to let you ask questions. Ross will hear from you with respect to questions that you're hearing as well, and we'll go from there. So, one of the questions that prompted me to want the county to respond is the question that we've received time and time again is why is the county forming these cities? And for some people, it's not clear that it is not the county that is initiating these cityhood movements, that these are grassroots initiatives initiated by citizens, and that we are not in a position to vote up or down a city. We are certainly in the area of which a city would be formed, but we do not have decision-making ability with respect to whether or not that takes place. That's a state function. There have been questions about why the process has moved so quickly. Again, that response probably better lies with our state legislators, but it's moving as quickly as it is because our state legislators have moved this along this process that would result in 3 or 4 cities being proposed to be on the ballot in May and one to be on the ballot potentially in November. And has that been confirmed? Is Mableton confirmed for November? Thank you. Okay. So there's also a FAQ about how this will impact the county coffers. I certainly will defer to our finance director to respond to that question. Have there been savings that have been substantiated through the cityhood efforts? There certainly have been, and I'm going to defer to him to respond to that as well as any remarks with respect to fees. With the cities that have been proposed, they are perhaps atypical to most cities in that they do not provide the full array of cityhoods or city services that are typically associated with the city. And we have that listed on the one pager as well. And for the 4 cities, the one that will offer the most robust array of cities will be the proposed city of East Cobb, offering planning and zoning services, code enforcement services, parks and rec, municipal court services, and public safety services. And this is per their feasibility study that we have reviewed. The city of Lost Mountain is proposing all of those except for public safety. So it'd be planning and zoning, code enforcement, sanitation, parks and rec, and a limited municipal court. And that's the same for the city of Mableton. The city of Vinings is seeking to provide all 5 of those services except for sanitation. And again, this is per what we have gleaned from reviewing the documents with respect to the cities, specifically the feasibility documents. With that, Ross, I think I've done a fair job in summarizing what we have here, but I didn't want to delve too much into this, as I much prefer to defer to our staff and for our attendees to ask questions and respond.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And for those of you in the audience, if you do have any questions, the lovely and talented Krista over here has some cards that she can give you to write the questions down and submit them up here. I checked our Cityhood questions at cobbcounty.org website before we got here today. So I do have some questions here, and I do want to introduce our esteemed panelists of experts here tonight. Jessica Gwynn, Director of Community Development, Bill Volkman, our Chief Financial Officer, Chief Hamilton with the Police Department, Chief Johnson, I've got my own name for him, with the Fire Department, Michael Brantley with the Parks. We have Randy Kreider with Public Safety over there, Brandy McDowell, Wade Brandy with the OTT, and Melissa Alterio with 911, and my ultimate boss, Dr. Jackie McMorris, the county manager, is here this evening as well. And the chairwoman already went through a lot of questions that we can and can't answer. But let's start with Bill Volkman, our Chief Financial Officer, who always wants to go through the financials first. And we start, Bill, with the services, which the chairwoman just kind of went over.
So are you okay with skipping past this one and going straight to the numbers? All right. Very good. So the numbers up on the screen come straight from the feasibility study. So one of the things that we did want to break down for you, as the chairwoman stated, the city of East Cobb is proposing a police, fire, and 911 services. So they are a little unique as far as the impact to the county. You'll see all four cities do have a general fund impact, as most of those fees come from insurance premium tax, franchise fees, building permits, and so on. So those are all collected within the county general fund. So the numbers listed across that column are going to come straight from the feasibility studies. The only exception would be some of the franchise fees are not currently levied by the county, but there are additional franchise fees that are looking at for the city. For example, for electric, gas, and telephone, county currently collects cable. So going back to the city of East Cobb, they are a little bit unique as they're proposing a millage rate, and that is simply a shift. So currently residents of the proposed city pay 2.86 mils into the county's fire fund, and you can see that number up there is just under $14 million. So that would go from the county reduction to the county's fire fund to provide their general operations along with other revenue sources. And as the chairwoman stated, the city of East Cobb is also proposing a 911 service, and that is the $1 fee that's associated with each phone line within those city limits. So you can see the impact there. So this table is going to show us the overall negative impact to the revenues. Now, city of East Cobb, we're looking at just over $23 million. City of Lost Mountain is just over $8 million. City of Mableton is just over $8 million, and City of Vinings, having the least amount of services, is just under 1.8 million, for a total of 41.4 million if all four cities are formed. So we're going to jump to the expenditure slide. There we go. So this is where we get a lot of questions, because this is simply, in a lot of ways, just the utility and operating costs of these facilities. The biggest cost to the county is going to be personnel. So that is one of the things that you'll notice that makes these numbers so small. We're not saying this is the cost to run these facilities, because the biggest cost is personnel. Those personnel are proposed to be reassigned to other areas of the county. So we're not looking at letting go any county staff as a result of any city being formed. So again, these numbers here, heavily in parks and then again in fire, is just going to be our personnel costs. And then you'll notice that City of Mableton and City of Vinings has a hotel motel collection. These are the only cities that have hotel motels within the proposed city limits. So there would be some savings there as a result. So that's one of the things that we do look at. Anything else that you want me to touch on regarding the number slides? No, but a couple of questions that came in. Sure. When it comes to finances, has to do with really the uncertainty moving forward. And there are a lot of questions that we can't really answer at this point when it comes to finances, correct? That is true. And this isn't we don't anticipate this being the first year impact. This is going to be more of the full year impact after they're fully operational and begin collecting 100% of their revenues. So there are a lot of unknowns. Again, the franchise fees, for example, would be one of the unknowns that would definitely look at. And we know the feasibility studies are based on some dated information as far as the digest, because again, we're still getting new digest information. So the tax numbers for the fire fund could be a little bit different as we move forward. We've seen a very positive growth in the revenue or in the real estate market in the past year.
And I've received a lot of questions worded a little bit differently each time, but they're usually from people who are not in one of the 4 proposed cities, but asking how this could affect them financially. And is there an easy answer to that?
There's not an easy answer to that. I can say that, based on the fees, there would be no additional fees from the county as far as what we were proposing today. Our services would remain the same. But as far as the long-term impacts, remains to be seen.
Okay, and I'm going to transition to the chairwoman, if you don't mind. Chairwoman, we discussed this at one of the earlier town halls. A lot of questions continue to come in about schools, people worried about which schools their children may be going to, or whether the senior exemption for schools will go away, or whether the school tax will change in any way. How do you respond to those?
Yes, thank you. So Cobb County government is a different jurisdiction than Cobb County schools. And so we are not anticipating there to be any direct financial impact. Now, is there an indirect impact? Certainly, because the way our schools go, our community goes, and the way our community goes, our schools go. And so when you look at a lot of the planning and zoning functions, which are desired by the proposed cities, their efforts to plan and zone around the school district would have an indirect impact to the school, as similar to our decisions around land use and zoning. However, there should be no direct fiscal impact to the schools. This does not change how students are zoned for schools. All of that falls within the jurisdiction of Cobb County Schools District.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And while you're at the mic, one question that came in right before I came over here, it was a very long question. I'm kind of paraphrased it, where you had mentioned during your State of the County talk about affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
So the question basically was, this was from somebody who lives in East Cobb. Does this mean apartments will be coming to my neighborhood, or will Section 8 apartments be popping up in East Cobb?
Certainly. Saying that affordable housing is important to Cobb County is something that I do assert is true. And this is not only true for Cobb County, but it's true for any local government anywhere. People are having a harder place to live. And we found that with the rise in home values here in our county, as well as people are experiencing that again nationally with the rise in housing costs and just generally with inflation. And we can't help the fact that Cobb County, in addition to Metro Atlanta, is just a desirable place to live. And with average home values being over 300,000 in Cobb County, if you're someone that's working at a service wage level, you probably are not going to be able to afford a place to live in Cobb. And this makes it very difficult, as our economy in Cobb does depend a lot on retail. It depends a lot on tourism. Nonetheless, recognizing that this is an issue in Cobb County doesn't mean that this is an issue that's coming next door to you, or is coming to any particular neighborhood, or is coming to East Cobb. This is something that the county and the commissioners are certainly discussing, and we would consider where this would be placed. Similar to any land use and zoning decision, this would be with the public. So I find it a bit of a stretch for there to be communications, or I would perceive even fear tactics about that comment, meaning that affordable housing is coming next door. Even if we were to break that down from just a technical perspective, to have affordable housing, you need to have affordable land values. And there's a lot that goes into that analysis, which wouldn't be done overnight. It wouldn't be done without the public, and it would have to be in a place where it's feasible.
Okay, thank you. I got one question from the audience here, and we brought everybody here except for our county attorney who would be able to answer this question, but I don't know if Dr. McMorris may know how many times this can come before the voters. For instance, if a Cityhood effort fails, when they may be able to bring it back to the voters. I'm getting a lot of. Yeah. So we think it's as quickly as the next legislative session. It could come back again. Jessica, got a question for you. Many claim that the county is moving toward more high-density developments, especially in East Cobb. Is that true?
No, that's not true. And I appreciate the dialogue that we were able to have at the Board of Commissioners meeting this morning about planning and zoning and how that functions here in the county. For East Cobb and all areas of the county, we have the comprehensive land use plan, and it's a community-driven plan. In fact, we're working right now on the 5-year update to the comprehensive plan, getting ready to kick off our second round of public meetings. I hope many of you will join us for that. But that's a community-driven process that determines where different types of land use go, whether it's housing, what the density looks like, mixed use, commercial, industrial, all those uses. We want to ensure that as we're working through that process, we have the input of the community to make sure that we put those uses in the appropriate spot in the areas that are desired by the community.
There's a lot of questions that came in, and we talked about this at the Board of Commissioners meeting today, the Unified Development Code, and a lot of questions came in about that in different forms, but the general theme was that would green light higher density developments in not just East Cobb, but all the proposed cities.
Yeah, and that also is not accurate at all. Again, the plan itself is what drives where different land uses go, and the density of residential uses, the intensity of commercial uses. The code, whether it's our current zoning code and development regulations, or as we're proposing right now to combine those into a unified development code, so it's a one-stop shop for all of your development standards here in Cobb, and simplify the process a little bit. You know, ultimately, the code is a tool of plan implementation. So we have the plan. This is what the community has said is our vision. This is what the community has said we would like to see in our communities and in our neighborhoods. And the code is a tool, one of the tools that we use to help ensure that happens, that the type of development that comes is in keeping with the desires of the community.
And some questions came in about code enforcement. Do you know how that would work in the new cities compared to how we do it here today?
I've looked at the feasibility studies. I didn't really see a whole lot of detail in terms of what they were proposing in terms of numbers of code enforcement officers. I can tell you that for the cities that are proposed, for those areas currently, the city of Lost Mountain, which makes up about 15% of the land area in Cobb County, so it's a huge portion of the property, we have one code enforcement officer who's assigned there, and they frequently are available to help out in other areas because that's just one of our areas that we don't have a whole lot of demand. The East Cobb and Vinings areas there, we have about 2 code enforcement officers that are able to cover those areas. Again, we can ramp up as necessary, but that's generally adequate. Mableton, on the other hand, right now we have 4 officers who are assigned full-time to Mableton, and frankly, we could use at least 4 more.
Okay. And I'm going to bring up Parks, Michael Brantley, with some questions that came in. One of the interesting things is you can tell people love the park that they're familiar with. And there's a lot of questions that are really park specific, but in general, what would you tell people about what could be the status of their favorite park in their favorite potential city?
I don't think you know now from the feasibility studies. It doesn't really go into the operational aspects of any of the parks. The parks are listed in the feasibility studies, but even in some of the feasibility studies, I think some were left off. Probably just an oversight of whoever was doing the study, whether it be UGA or Georgia State. But the actual sites themselves, it could change. You just don't know. That will be made, a decision will be made by the elected officials and or the person that they hire to run the parks. So a lot of those questions will be answered once that happens.
If a city becomes a city, what then happens in regards to the parks in those cities, as far as you know?
Hard to tell. Again, you don't see anything from any of the feasibility studies. Now, the parks themselves, a lot of those parks are purchased with park bond funds or purchased with deed restrictions. So those park bond funds, anything that was purchased with park bond, it has to stay a recreational facility in perpetuity. A lot of deed restrictions have certain things where a deed restriction says this property can only be X. It can only be used for X. So those deed restrictions will travel with the property if the cities take over.
We got a couple questions. There are some parks that we have that have a master plan, a plan for their development in the future. Should a city take over that park, what would become of that master plan?
The master plan could be used by that city, or the city could go out and decide they want to do another master plan for that park. A lot of the plans that were done for a lot of the parks may have been done 10 years ago. Recreational trends change year after year. So there could be an involvement of those plans. They could look and say, we want to change this or change that inside of a park. It may not be the full park, it may be parts of the park, but those things can be changed by the new elected officials.
And I'm going to ask this question of you, although it could be asked of several of these folks. If a city comes over and takes over a park, will the people that are working in that park stay in that park?
No, the full-time staff and the part-time staff would not necessarily transfer over to the city. They would stay with the Parks Department. Now, the cities could hire those employees to be city employees, and there's nothing we would be able to do about that. And a lot of times the employees might want to stay at that park. That's not anything we're gonna stop them from doing. It's an open, fair market for anything.
And again, I think we talked about this in one of the last town halls, but just for you and running your department, again, just it seems like there's just a lot more questions than answers at this point.
I think there are, and I think that goes back to every park is unique, and I think that every city is going to be unique in how they treat those parks. I think everybody wants to have a service level of quality of life, and I think that's why Parks and Rec is so prevalent in all of these studies, because they want that quality of life. But parks could change, and different parts of the county, they might want to do something different.
Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm going to borrow you, although Brandy's in the wings, because the couple of DOT related questions, and I think I have a slide. A lot of questions about who's going to maintain roads in the new city, and that's state law that you can read it up there. A new municipal corporation is created. A new municipality shall assume the ownership, control, care, and maintenance of county road rights of way, unless the municipality and county agree otherwise by a joint resolution. And I know, Chairwoman, you've been getting a lot of those questions as well. Who's going to fill my potholes in our neighborhood and build sidewalks?
Yes. This question may be better directed to the proponents, but I'm not aware from looking at the feasibility studies of any of the cities taking on the DOT function. With respect to right-of-way, DOT typically governs right-of-way. And so for any utilities that are offered in the right-of-way, there would have to be some negotiation about how the city would take ownership of it, or if they would, because those tend to go hand in hand with our operation of the roadway.
And transportation is just one component of what would be a large amount of negotiations and talks between the county and a new city. Do you have any handle on how that would proceed?
I don't. I mean, this is something that we have conversations with our existing cities. It's always a hot topic. Road maintenance is not an inexpensive endeavor. And so again, I know this would be a much needed discussion, again, if cities are looking forward to taking any fees associated with the right of way.
And why I have you up here, just a general thought, if you can, about what kind of questions you're continuing to get today and the mood of the people that seem to be asking the questions.
While we do hear from people who would be considered proponents or opponents, there are a lot of people who are just now learning about this. And again, a lot of the questions pertain to why isn't the county doing more to inform us about what's going on? There are persons who have questions similar to what was asked. How does it impact schools? That's one of the dominant questions. Or how is this going to impact taxes, which I'm glad that the finance director has addressed. Now, there have been some concerns with respect to development that I find myself responding to, questions pertaining to affordable housing, questions pertaining to industrial development. And it's unfortunate to address some of these things when I know that our current commission takes a lot of pride and a lot of time in negotiating with citizens and residents when it comes to development. And while there may be persons who are pushing for certain types of development, for every zoning case, there's always somebody on one side of an issue and on the opposing side of an issue. And if you become a city, you can't take away someone's property rights. They still have the ability to put forward zoning. And so I deal with a lot of questions, well, we may be able to stop this type of zoning. Well, if somebody has the land use for that type of zoning, that's not a right that can be easily taken. Now, I'm not going to go into to the law about that. But again, there are just certain constitutional rights that are inherent with the property owner's position, that regardless if a property is in a city or a county, that's not necessarily going to change. Um, Nonetheless, I do agree, and this is part of me coming from a grassroots perspective. Before I even ran for office, you know, a community wants to feel as if they have a significant say in how their community is developed, and I wholly understand that. And I would like for residents to feel like they have a say in what the county does today and how communities are developed. And I, pray that when cities are formed, that they continue to find that voice. But the same access to share that voice is present with the commissioners that they may anticipate would be present with the city.
Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman. Chief Johnson, I'm going to borrow you because I've got some follow-ups from, I think, our last town hall meeting. There was a lot of talk about public safety because we were over in Sewell Mill near East Cobb. We got one person following up from that meeting wants you to kind of describe what a typical response looks like for a residential and commercial fire, the number of personnel dispatched, and how that works on a typical call.
So we define a residential fire as a single family dwelling. And so the way we dispatch it is we'll send a certain number of engines, and we have one engine at every single fire station. And so I'm going to be quoted on this and I'm going to be wrong, so just bear with me. But it's somewhere, I think it's 4 engines on a house fire. And then we'll send, Melissa, you may remember this, 4 engines on a house fire, a truck, a rescue, a battalion chief. And if we can, we'll start with that smaller. But once it has been confirmed that it is actually a working fire, then we call it, upgrade it to a working fire dispatch. And then we add the balance of the alarm so we would get a full response. So on that house fire, we would get the 4 engines, a ladder truck, a rescue, 2 battalion chiefs would respond. We would have a 3rd battalion chief as a support chief. We would have a squad respond, which is a heavy rescue vehicle, an air truck respond, so that they're more of a support vehicle for our breathing apparatus and some rehab stuff. And then on a commercial response, so that's basically that's anything other than a single family residential structure. So it's, a multifamily residential structure. That even goes down to a duplex, townhomes. Those are considered for us commercial responses, and obviously your commercial pieces of properties. And on that, we make it much larger. We add additional engines, we add additional ladders, we send much more equipment. So it just, we initially send a smaller number, but once we confirm it is a confirmed working fire, then we upgrade the response much larger. I hope that answers the question. As far as the exact numbers, the initial response on a residential fire, if I'm not mistaken, is 13-ish, and I think on the commercial it's up around 20. But again, don't hold me to those numbers. I can look in my packet that I have here with me and try to find that for you, whoever asked that question.
Okay, and I'm going to have you stand up here but not answer this question because we get a lot of questions about what about the fire trucks, the apparatus in the stations. It's related to a question concerning using the East Cobb Government Center for the Cityhood. And so the answer is written by our legal department and up on the screen here. It says the only fees that are set by state law are for park property, $100 per acre, and for fire stations that only serve territory wholly within the city jurisdiction at $5,000 for each such fire station. Any other county property located within the new city limits will be negotiated between the 2 local governments. And I've called you a lot about questions that we've received about how much the fire invests in East Cobb. And that's a tough thing to get a handle on, primarily because there are 2 fire stations in the city, but the proposed city would be served by 5 stations. If you can try to make sense of that for me.
So yes, to answer your question, the way the proposed city is set up, it currently has our station 15 on the north end and our station 21 on the south end. The proposed city limits is actually, and I said this before, it's 13% larger as far as response territory than what we currently have for stations 15 and 21. We do gain a little bit of engine 15's territory on the very northern end, but we lose a larger portion on the western side. And that's where this proposed city gets into stations that would respond in the area that the proposed city engine 15 and 21 would get in. So we have engine 14 who covers part of that territory, engine 13. So you can see it up there in the EC1, EC2, and EC3, EC4. You can see that, and I'll just use the northwestern part of the city. And I'm sorry I've got my back to you all. Please forgive me. But Fire Station 14 is right down the corner. But that would now become the city of East Cobb, and however they number their stations. So for simplicity, we'll say engine 15. Engine 15 would respond to that area. And for EC2, that's Fire Station 20. Fire Station 20 for the furthermost western edge of the proposed city. Our Fire Station 20 is right down the road. It's very close. And then you can see for EC3 is Station 3. And actually EC4 gets into a little bit of our Fire Station 19. So I hope that answers your question, Ross. But the way we have it covered now is in those areas, that whole western edge, whether it's Station 14, Station 20, Station 3, Station 19, they help cover that response territory, especially when there's a multi-unit or like we talked about with the commercial fires or residential house fires. Those stations would respond into that area the way it stands now.
There's a question also that kind of spun off our last meeting too about the ISO rating. Your department has an ISO 1 rating. The questions kind of run around the line, does big whoop. What does that mean? Is that a big deal or not? And why should I care?
So a lot of people, they talk about ISO and what it means. And it depends on your insurance company and do they recognize ISO? It's really insurance company dependent. But what you can bank on is ISO is basically just a measure of risk. Your ability as a fire department, it has nothing to do with your ability to handle a medical call, anything outside of a fire response. That is what ISO is. And ISO 1 is the best rating. And so Director Kreider was our fire chief the last time the ISO agency came in to rate us, if you will. And it's your ability as a fire department to handle fire, your water department to deliver water so that we can put out the fire, and our 911 agency's ability to properly dispatch and handle the call for the fire dispatch. And so Cobb County has an ISO 1, which is unheard of for a county department. It is a very, very, very small percentage of departments nationwide. And Director, you may remember the actual percentage, but it's a fraction of 1% of county fire departments who have an ISO rating of 1. And so what that means as far as your insurance, is it going to decrease your rates? That depends on the insurance company you use. And so on the residential side, I can tell you it's probably not really significant. On the commercial side of people, business owners, it's going to help you some. But again, regardless of the money aspect, it's our ability to handle the risk.
And
Yes, ma'am. I knew I was wrong. I'm glad the TV camera was gone. Okay, so 3 engines, rescue truck, and we add the balance. So, okay.
a lot of questions that came in, also dovetailing out of the conversation we had with one of your deputy chiefs during the last town hall about mutual aid agreements and how that works, and would Cobb still come into East Cobb if they were needed?
Okay, and so we've had the conversation with the Cityhood folks, and to be quite honest with you, we have mutual aid agreements with everybody in Cobb. We have a mutual aid agreement with Smyrna Fire. We have a mutual agreement with Austell Fire. We have an automatic aid agreement with Marietta. We have mutual aid agreements with the departments that surround Cobb County. The thing that will happen is if the city of East Cobb is voted in, those are decisions that not this proponents at this point, they don't have a dog in that fight. Those are discussions that will happen once the city is voted in, and then those elected officials under the guidance of the chairwoman, our county manager, our legal department, myself and my staff, then through the director, then we would have to work that out. The thing that we would have to look at is, from a mutual aid perspective, what can we as a fire department, or what can the city of East Cobb expect of us as the unincorporated Cobb County Fire Department to send into the proposed city, but still maintain the level of coverage that the citizens of unincorporated Cobb County expect us to provide them? Those things would have to be negotiated out. Is there likely going to be some form of a mutual aid agreement? Absolutely. Absolutely. But we just don't know what that looks like at this point. Those are conversations that would have to happen later on.
Okay. Chief Hamilton, I want to borrow you. Talking about mutual aid agreements, your agreements are different than the fire department's agreements. How does that work?
That's correct. So we don't have mutual aid. We basically operate on the state law. And basically what the state law, and I'm just going to paraphrase, is that if one of our neighboring cities needs us, then we're going to be obligated to respond. Now, kind of echoing what Chief Johnson said, obviously, whatever manpower that we lend to the cities at that particular time would also have to make sure that it does not hinder or handicap what's going on in unincorporated Cobb at that particular time. So I think the cities would understand too, we're not going to sacrifice the safety of our men and women, just like I know they wouldn't.
And I know, much like parks and fire and everybody else, there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions that I think you guys have as well. But one of them that came in the last day or two was, what about who would do in the city of East Cobb investigate homicides or handle SWAT calls and that sort of thing?
Well, I don't know. That's going to be a question going to have to be answered by whoever the chief officials are of the city, the governing bodies, and they would have to make that decision as far as who would, what kind of detective units they're going to be able to have. Obviously, that's going to take manpower. So depending on how many officers they're going to have for the cities. But again, that's not something that I can really answer today.
And what about the officers who currently work out in East Cobb? Would they stay there, or how would that work?
Well, kind of like I think someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Mr. Brantley, as far as the employees. My hope is that our county officers and men and women are going to want to stay with Cobb PD. But if they make that conscious decision, they're going to have to do whatever's best for their families and themselves. If they decide they want to go over to the city, that's not something that we're going to try to stop.
Okay. Melissa, I know you're here. I got one for you that came in. The city of East Cobb has in their feasibility study, I believe, running a 911 center. Will you talk about the cost of setting up a E911 system and the additional cost of the radio system that the public uses? Contracts, well, there's a lot of other stuff in here, but start with that.
That is this is not short person conducive. Okay, there we go. That's a very difficult question. I mean, I really can't answer how much the cost of a startup 911 center will cost. I can guesstimate. I'm a 31-year veteran in 911, and I do know a little something about it. I know the approximate, according to the feasibility study, and I did check, the approximate revenue for the city of East Cobb specifically be about $1.2 million. And I can just say what we spend from a technology standpoint. I think it would be a lot more than the revenue. But again, that is totally a guesstimate. That's very, very difficult to state. What I can tell you is that the radio system, we manage the largest radio system in the state. We have 6 counties, including Cobb, on our radio system. That doesn't mean that we dispatch for the counties, or simply on our radio system for interoperability purposes, over 11,000 users. Each radio is $275 per radio in annual maintenance. And just for perspective, we have 5 radios per fire apparatus. That's about all I can answer really at this point from a price standpoint.
So here's a question for me, dovetailing off that. So I know a city, you can fund that through fees on cellular phones, correct?
That's correct. So with Cobb County specifically, we're funded solely on E911 revenue right now. And we're very fortunate that there are the FCC did a study, I want to say was part of this big study back in 2018, and I do have a copy of it in my office, that state there's about 12, well, let me back up a little, about 73% of 911 centers in the country, and please don't quote me on that exact percentage, but I'll say thereabouts, around 70-75% are not funded solely on 911 fees. So we're actually pretty fortunate in Cobb County, but that also just kind of goes to show with the advanced technology out there right now, many 911 centers are falling or having to pull money from their general fund in order to assist with funding for personnel and operations.
So every once in a while, I see agenda items come up to buy more radios for the sheriff's office, et cetera. Does that all come out of that? E911?
No, our radio system, for instance, our 800 megahertz division is funded by the general fund. 911 fees fund our personnel, our operations minus the radio system, our computer-aided dispatch system, our E911 phone system, and all those components that serve the operations of the 911 center.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairwoman, I have a couple for you, and just if anybody's got any other questions, I'm getting to the end of my list, so send them on up. But Chairwoman, there's a list on the website, cobbcounty.org/cityhood, that lists some Cobb services and amenities that would be in the potential cities, like the East Cobb Library, and I think West Cobb Senior Center, and Freeman Pool, and others. What would you tell people about the future of those?
I feel like I need to defer to parks, but I'm not aware of facilities beyond parks. And I don't know, again, if that includes parks and recreation as a whole. All those things listed. So I perceive that's one of the things that we'll have to negotiate.
I think there's just a fear from some people that if the cities become cities, that the East Cobb Library and others
Or
would
the
just shut
senior-
down.
Yeah, typically we don't associate libraries with our parks. So again, my presumption or assumption will be that that will remain a county function. Michael, you may be able to speak to that.
The only thing, thank you, Chairwoman. The only thing I'll say, Ross, and I know this sort of came out from the West Cobb Senior Center being inside of Lost Mountain Park. I believe it actually stated in the feasibility study that West Cobb Senior Center would stay under the county. I think that was a footnote in the feasibility study. Again, we're just gleaming off of what the feasibility studies say. And most of those things like libraries, senior centers, they were not necessarily listed in the feasibility study. So as of right now, we don't see them as, viable things for the cities to take over.
Okay, got a couple of late questions. One for our Chief Financial Officer. What effect could this have on the county debt and its financial rating?
We don't anticipate any additional debt being issued as a result of the Citihoods at this time. Sorry, say that again? No, any existing outstanding debt that the county owes would remain with the county. So and just to kind of clarify, I think the biggest one that's outstanding that would be related to the cities would be, as Mr. Brantley said, the parks bonds where we purchased parkland. That is actually going to be closed out this fiscal year with this year's tax collections. So.
And then did you tuned out briefly? What about going up to the financial rating agencies?
That will definitely be a conversation. It always is. We've seen cityhood movements throughout the state of Georgia come up in conversations. It's just one of the things that we have to discuss with them each and every year. We would have to assess the financial impact, which we've shared a little bit today. That'll be an ongoing conversation because obviously we just have the feasibility studies, but we'd have to provide updates each and every year as to what that impact would look like. We do not anticipate a negative change in our rating simply as the cityhoods are voted in. That is not something that we anticipate.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's correct. Very few. Yes.
Melissa, this is a quick one for you. You can shout it out from your seat if you want. Do any other cities in Cobb contract their 911 services from the county? How many?
For audio and those
I thought it was going to be quick. Sorry. Thought there was just a number
I can pivot.
involved.
So we do contract for the city of Marietta, the city of Powder Springs. Kennesaw Ackworth does have their own 911 center, but we dispatch for their fire department. Well, yes. Well, okay, thank you. So we dispatch Cobb Fire. The city of Smyrna has their own 911 center. City of Austell has their own.
So there's a contract involved, money changing hands, that sort of stuff.
That's correct.
Okay,
For the city of Marietta and Powder Springs, that's correct.
gotcha. Chief Hamilton, late question, how many police precincts cover East Cobb? And because Chief Johnson was talking about fire stations covering East Cobb, how would you describe the police coverage in that area?
The answer to the first question is there's one precinct in East Cobb on Lower Roswell Road that would be inside the city if it becomes incorporated. What was the second question? I'm sorry, as far as the manpower?
Yeah, I mean, just how does that, how is it currently staffed?
Well,
And what
okay.
may happen?
Well, currently, our precinct 4 encompasses about 46 police officers that are actually on the road. That's not including the detectives that they have that's also housed there, but it's 46 officers that's on the road. As I said earlier, I'm hoping all 46 would stay with Cobb, but again, that would be something that it would be an individual decision on whether or not they decide to go to the city or not.
All right, thank you, Chief. Chairwoman, the county has communicated that no lobbyists or attorneys were used for the county's response to the Cityhood effort. Would you waive privilege for all records, notes, discussions related to the engagement with the firms?
Can you repeat the question?
Well, it just really has to do, did we use the lobbyists and attorneys to work on the county's response to the Cityhood effort? And if we provide records, I think those would be open records though, wouldn't they?
I would suggest someone, if they want to know to the T to pull an open records request. To my knowledge, we have hired a lobbyist to help us to address the broad array of matters that we had at the state. They were not hired to respond directly to cityhood matters. Yeah. Yeah.
As deputy county manager, one of the first things that the prior county manager assigned to me was to go to the Capitol. I did not realize, nor did I have lobbyist experience when I went down there. It is massive. It's massive. I was literally running from one committee meeting to the other all day long. I literally was down there every single day for probably 3 years. And it was crazy because there are consecutive meetings going on. My assistant was back here at Cobb trying to find the answers to the questions. I was relying on the team to help me get answers to questions. State reps and senators were texting me and asking me, what does Cobb think about this? What do they think about that? And they were questions from all across the gamut, from short-term rentals to salary bills to you name it. And it is very time consuming. So we have been contemplating getting a state lobbyist, as we'd already hired a federal lobbyist to help us with grants. We've been looking at that for a long time. And so when I became county manager, that responsibility went to the deputy county manager. And just the other day, he said to me, I don't know how you did it. It is a lot of work. So I will say as well that it is way more things going on downtown that impact Cobb that are way beyond cityhood. And I would just like to take a moment and answer the question, Ross, I don't know if you did, about what happens is if it fails. Did you answer that?
Sort of. I think you have a better answer.
Okay. So I reached out to 2 state representatives, and the question was, if a cityhood fails this time, how soon would it be brought back by referendum? And also, would it be the next session? The answer is yes. It is a 2-year process, introduced the first year, studied over the interim, then voted on in the second. So basically, the process would have to start all over again at the legislature.
I'd just like to do a quick follow-up for you. Many people may be watching this and saying, why does Cobb County even need to be down in Atlanta anyway at the state legislature? Why even deal with that?
That's a dangerous place during the legislative session, and I'm sure you all probably somewhat keep up with it. But there's a lot that goes on, and if you're not there, you miss out. You really do. You don't have a seat at the table. You don't have a voice. So we don't have a choice but to be there, as large as Cobb is. And I say it again, there are so many bills coming out that could have an adverse impact on Cobb. And but for a voice down there saying to ACCG and to our lobbyists, this could hurt Cobb in this way. I know there were bills that may have impacted community development, bills that would have impacted other departments, but overall, the consumer and resident of Cobb. So there were a lot of things, and every week we would put out a summary of the bills that impacted Cobb and send it to the Board of Commissioners so that they would be aware and to get their feedback and input.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Chairwoman, I've got my last question on the card, and then I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of close it out since we're running out of questions. But since the citizens of East Cobb paid through their taxes for police and fire assets within the proposed boundaries, would you commit as the county to leave the assets in place for those citizens who've already paid for them?
I couldn't make that decision solely as a chair. That would have to be determined by the board. And a lot of these things would have to be negotiated, as was reflected on the slide, beyond parks. And I believe the fire stations themselves were included in that.
Okay, I'm going to say one thing and then let you wrap up.
So-
We get a lot of questions. The county switchboard is run in my office, so we get a good barometer of the questions being asked. And we are frequently updating the website at cobbcounty.org/cityhood and still taking questions every day on the email address cityhoodquestions@cobbcounty.org. So I just encourage people to check the website on a regular basis and continue to send in the questions that we'll try to get answered. Because we know we've seen that there's just a hunger for people getting information about these cityhood efforts as they move along. And with that, Chairwoman, take us home.
Yes, thank you, Ross, for being here this evening, as well to our staff and all of our attendees and those tuning in. As you've heard here today, there are 4 cityhood efforts that will be on the ballot sometime this year. 3 of them will be on the ballot in May. And I continue to get calls and emails from people who are just now learning about cityhood. And when I get calls, I try to extrapolate how many people have the same questions and concerns that are not contacting me. And it makes me perceive that there's still a large number of citizens that are unaware. And that makes me concerned, because when people go into the polling place in May and November respectively, we want them to be an informed voter. And knowing about what's going on is important, so they know how to vote and how this will impact them. This is why we are here today. We are here today to inform our public and to inform our voters. And as Ross said, we have a website that answers a lot of the questions that we have received, and it's at the website behind me. We encourage residents to continue to reach out, but not just to us. We encourage them to reach out to those who are proposing the cities and to their legislators as well. And I believe you can find that information on our website so that you can ask them questions that they may be better able to answer. Again, we as a county, we are here to respond to the things as we perceive it will impact our operations and impact citizens overall due to the impact to our operations. I've said a lot during our prior meetings, and again, I just want to again provide that I am a proponent of Cobb County. I'm the chairwoman of Cobb County, and I will always be a proponent of Cobb. But I can certainly understand why people may be in support of cities. As a prior community advocate, I appreciate people wanting to have control and autonomy over their community and create a sense of place. I also share some of the concerns of those who are opposed to these efforts as well. Needless to say, I'm here to best educate, because my greatest is concern for those that don't know, and particularly for those measures that will be on the ballot in May. May has a very small percentage of the total voting population, which means a fraction of your community will be determining the outcome of your community. And so whether or not you want to see this move forward or not, it behooves everyone that knows about this to get engaged in this if you want to have a voice in what is going to be the outcome of your community, particularly if it's within a city boundary. So I can't stress enough, please do what you can to be involved. And again, we are here at the county as a resource. Thank you again for your time this evening. Thank you to our staff. Thank you, Communications, for all that you've done to help put this on. And we look forward to continuing to have these conversations through May and subsequently in November. Thank you.